Welcome to Electric Grumpy World. I, as always, am your host, Electric Sheep City, joined, again as always, by my partner in crime, Guy Grumpy. Guy Grumpy, how are you doing this fine season finale episode?
Season finale episode. Can't believe it. Can't believe it's only been 8 episodes this season, and can't believe it's already over.
I
But
know, right? It's like, what, I, I still have so many questions. So many things were answered, but what, what?
yeah, there were whole swaths of this episode that didn't have a finale, right? That just set us up for season 4. But it was definitely a longer but enjoyable episode. I was a little disappointed overall in some of our theories didn't come to fruition, but I think it set us up pretty well for a larger story arc, and it has me excited for the future of the franchise.
Completely agreed. On all counts, there are a number of things that I thought were going to pay off differently.
Hmm.
Sometimes in ways that I liked the way that they did it, and sometimes in ways that I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Well then.
Oh, well, now we know who the final Pearl was. Doesn't really make sense, but okay.
Right. So, without further ado, let's jump in. Let's jump in to the episode. Dolores kind of introduces this episode with a voiceover that I thought was so prescient for the episode itself and the themes. So I included it here. She said, "Some people see the ugliness in this world, the disarray. I was taught to see the beauty, but I was taught a lie." She also says, "I've died many times, but there is only one real end. I will write this one myself." So, of course, spoilers abound. This is a recap of the season finale, and Dolores writes her own end. Like she dies in this episode, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, how much can a host really die? She's died many times, as she says here. So, I don't expect that we've seen the last of Dolores.
And so, I go back and forth on that. I think that this is the end of this particular Dolores, and one of the reasons why is because of how she introduces this episode. So it could be a red herring, as they are wont to do. But she basically, not basically, she says, "There's only one real end, and I will write this one myself." I think this is her saying, like, I'm going out with the bang. Like, I'm setting up y'all to continue this endeavor of the rest of the world, but I'm going to kind of lay my life on the line to set this foundation where y'all have that choice.
So Dolores has been an interesting character for all 3 seasons in that she seems to have it seems like she's been set on this path of self-discovery and self-awareness and understanding her place in the world and creating a new one, breaking free from the strings. But at the same time, there's still a lot of things that show that she's following programming, especially in seasons 1 and 2. This season was a little bit more of a departure, but then again, we also saw there's more than one Dolores, and some of the things that we were seeing about her, like when she was dressed in all black and taking on William's traits, that never really came to anything in season 3, but it kind of led you to think still that she's following some programming path that maybe Ford had put her on. So even though she's saying that there's only one real end and she's going to create this one herself, and it kind of leads you down that path, very similar to the way Arnold set himself down to write his own end. Maybe that was her intent, was to get killed, but I feel like in season 4, she's going to either be brought back because now they're way in the future and Bernard's going to need some help, and so he's going to recreate her and bring her back, or Charlotte would have already brought her back and tried to use her like she was being used through season 3. So I definitely I understand that she probably died in this iteration, but because she was the first and everybody was based off of her, then I can't imagine that they would get rid of her going into future seasons. So she's kind of the face of the franchise, so to speak.
Very good point. Honestly, I think that timelines didn't really factor into this season, but I do think that this voiceover probably happened in my head canon. This voiceover happens whenever she is laying on the floor, like at the very end, whenever Maeve kind of enters her mind and she's kind of having her essentially death rattle, right? I think this is her kind of editorializing, kind of poeticizing. And I don't think that's bad. I think that's a, great kind of poetic, artistic way to kind of end it. And I just kind of took it, particularly in my rewatch, any of the voiceover stuff as being kind of from that time where she's kind of looking back at her life and poeticizing it as she definitely should. And how she's dying and how she's kind of going out and what her life means to her and what she hopes it will mean going forward. But I obviously have nothing to base that off of. That's just kind of me taking poetic license in my interpretation.
Well, no, it's good. I mean, they mentioned a few times that she had poetic sensibilities, so that makes perfect sense that she would wax poetic about it as things are coming to an end for her. I kind of took it as more of a way of tying in the seasons because she's always been like, even since episode 1, saying that she sees the beauty in the world and things, and then season 2, then she starts to see less of that, and then season 3, then she sees in the real world that, hey, there's ugliness out here too. I thought it would be all beauty because I had been taught to see the beauty, and then season 4 will be, oh, I see the beauty again, or something like that.
Yeah, I think one of her, because she has many themes throughout both the series, season and episode. I think kind of one of her big takeaways is that she sees and notices both the ugliness and the beauty, and it's just kind of what she chooses to focus on. And one of the things that she definitely drives home is that kind of two big things that she drives home in this episode. One is giving Caleb his choice, right? There are a number of slides in here that talk about Caleb's choice, and how she is not just facilitating, but like setting up Caleb to be able to make that choice. So that's the big one. But the other one is that acknowledging and embracing the beauty while the ugliness is also there. And that in particular, again, we'll highlight extensively, I think, in the scene where she's dying and speaking with Maeve and in the field. So
that's fair.
Yeah, in this introduction, Sirach's goon finds Dolores' body. It's all bloody and stuff. And oh look, there's a ton of blood right by her head because her pearl's been removed. It kind of cuts to Caleb on his motorcycle, zooming away. He escaped with Dolores' pearl. Well, we don't have to speculate on that. We know.
Good that he figured out all of that real quick of what he needed to take and what he could leave behind.
Yeah, that virtual assistant is coming in clutch, let me tell you what. So after that, we kind of have our opening title sequence, and we come in with Bernard and William. They kind of go their separate ways here. So William says that he's going to kill all the hosts. Bernard tries to convince him to team up with him instead. He's like, no, I want to save the world too. Like, I want to stop Dolores too. Why shouldn't we team up? And William says that he needs to atone for his sins. He, of course, now is a genocidal maniac and shoots Ashley Stubbs. Ashley, of course, for the remainder of the episode, is kind of bleeding out from this wound. Bernard takes cover and speaks into his gadget, the little one that says that kind of switches between the pacifist Bernard and the not really aggressive Bernard, but the violently capable Bernard.
Right.
And he tells himself to remember himself, and he fights William. He's doing a pretty good job. And then the SFPD pulls up, and William scurries away. William goes his separate way out that way. But the SFPD are hosts. And Lawrence is one of the SFPD officers. They look kind of like SWAT team. Like they call we're saying SFPD here, but they are like heavily armed and like armored. So we don't see who they are at first.
It doesn't have to be the SWAT team. I imagine in 2050, then it'll be full-on military police everywhere anyway, right? So.
Very good point. Especially with how violent this not post-apocalyptic, pre-apocalyptic society is, right? With the like Rico app and stuff like that.
And the crazy weapons with, honing systems and crazy targeting capabilities. Everybody's got to be fully armored.
Yes, these violent delights are having violent ends.
Indeed.
To call back. So Lawrence is, of course, one of the SFPD officers, and he's one of Dolores's copies as well. Dolores reveals that she hid something inside Bernard's mind. Lawrence does. But Bernard says that he wants nothing to do with the plan. And Lawrence gives Bernard this little like suitcase type thing and says, I'm not the one you need to talk to. He also gives Bernard a kind of, whatchamacallit, like piece of paper, slip of paper with an address on it. Yeah. Tells him to go and see her. So as he's handing that, Bernard's like, what's this? Lawrence says, something to help you on your journey, but you have to go see her first. I can tell you where she is, and he hands Bernard the slip of paper to go see her. Right now, we don't know who her is. We think that that's Dolores, but of course we are incorrect.
Right. Definitely a red herring, but it's weird to have one in the same episode. Like, I almost feel like that scene was meant for the last episode. Mm-hmm. And then so you have a feeling that Bernard's going to confront Dolores in the finale, and then for whatever reason it got cut and dropped in here, because it's kind of a quick turnaround when you find out that it's not what you expect. Very much agreed.
It has kind of not only an immediate payoff, but also like the William kind of randomly still being with Bernard and then just immediately scurrying off, and like narratively, I think you're right. It makes much more sense in the penultimate episode, but for whatever reason, it ended up in here instead, and then that kind of makes sense as well. Honestly, narratively, it makes a lot more sense for the whole like Lawrence also being Dolores to be part of last episode's narrative arc as well. So yeah, I think you're completely right that this little scene kind of worked its way into this episode, and that's okay.
I'm also not too sure how I feel about Lawrence being the last one, because it's another one. Dolores, I think, did meet him, but it seems like an odd choice for her. She wasn't like super close. I would almost have preferred it to be Teddy, just so that we get that callback as one of the more popular characters from past seasons. And everyone assuming that he was one of them anyway. So it seems kind of odd as a choice for Dolores to bring that guy in particular.
It is a really odd bring. Musashi and Lawrence both, like, Musashi makes zero sense for her to bring his pearl.
Right.
Lawrence makes a little bit more sense because, like,
she at least met him.
Yeah, she met him when she was on her journey to through the maze in season 1. Lawrence is kind of like part of that. So it makes a little bit more sense. But he wasn't like a really big part of her story.
Right.
So yeah, I agree on that one as well. We should have seen Teddy. And then we cut over to Caleb. He's bringing Dolores back. That's his kind of arc here. The virtual assistant takes him to 3547 Hope Street. I just wanted to throw out there that this was Hope Street. They were a little heavy-handed with that, which I appreciate. He hacks in with his phone. Then there's like another little like padlock thing, which he has the code for, which he also uses his phone. There's a lot of phone integration in the pre-apocalyptic world. So he finds this big old coffin box and takes Dolores out, chains her to a pipe on the wall before putting her pearl in. Dolores, yes. Sorry, you look like
you're saying. It was really interesting that we're calling her Dolores when it's the robot skeleton of Dolores with just her head as with the skin on. Kind of a weird. I think it's the first time that Caleb really understands the extent of who he's been working with in this season. That he kind of figured that she was the robot a little bit earlier, but I think there was still a humanity to her that he could get past while the body was full. But just the way he looks at her, kind of you sense kind of a change in maybe even fear of her more than you'd saw the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's like there's a not really cognitive dissonance, but almost you can know something, but then seeing it affects you differently, right? And here he is definitely seeing it and reacting differently. Like he's chaining her to a pipe on the wall, right?
Right.
Which of course is completely ineffective, but he's still taking that precaution.
At least trying.
Right. Yeah. He's being safe, or trying to be. So once Dolores kind of comes to, her pearl here is done through like the front of her head, which is kind of cool that it kind of like closes in. It's just one of those like visual effects that is pretty neat. And I gotta say, I enjoyed that.
So that was the way the original hosts were built. So
right.
When we saw the Ford's family, then that's how their faces were. So it tells you that they're kind of going back in technology, at least as far as the host is concerned. And she even touches on that they got built with more squishy parts later, and so by being put back in the original body that is more built like they used to with the steel frames and things like that, it sets up Dolores coming back again a little bit better.
She's
not as many squishy parts.
Yeah, she's definitely back with that vengeance. And like you said, more robust. And while she may have slightly less of the technological features, she's more well equipped for combat, which she needed to be for this episode.
Right.
So Dolores claims to be someone who didn't want to play the role she was given anymore. Caleb asks how she knows exactly what Caleb would do. Dolores says that the people who built her studied him too. And of course, whenever she is very first saying this, it sounds like she's talking about humanity, but she very much is talking about Caleb in particular here, which we'll see very shortly. Caleb then asks if he's the bad guy, and Dolores says, "Think, Caleb. How did you get here?" And of course, that's one of the common mantras from Caleb's re-education. They keep on saying, "Think, Caleb. How did you get here?" And then he either remembers properly or remembers incorrectly. So I think that while I think that this is definitely the kind of accurate memory, it's kind of one of those telltale signs of, well, maybe she's brainwashed him as well. I don't think that that's the case, but it's fun to speculate on.
See, so I thought this was harkening back to some of our early theories that Caleb was still in this recovery mode, and
Mm.
um, this made up world to help him deal with what happened to him in the past. And so when Dolores says that, then it's just, hey, he's happened down this path on this simulation. So now Dolores is part of the simulation to help him through it, and he's just kind of gone astray from the programming to make some changes or whatever. I'm still not 100% convinced that we're in the real world and that this isn't a simulation, but uh, I understand it's gearing more that way. Just at this point in the show, that I was thinking maybe Dolores is really just part of this Rehoboam therapy program.
And it could very well be that we kind of get a progression, right? That they keep on zooming out. Season 1, they were in the park. Season 2, they zoomed out, and then there are more parks. Season 3, they're going out to the quote unquote real world. Season 4, they could reveal, oh, this hasn't been the real world, etc. And we're just not quite to that point yet. I think you're exactly right that none of this discounts that theory. The only thing that is kind of not discounting, but that's not kind of falling in line with that is that no one in who we're exposed to right now seems to be aware of the simulation that they're in, or that anything like that. For example,
Right.
Sirach definitely doesn't. We speculated back and forth whether he might be aware of said other realities. I definitely think that he doesn't after seeing him in this episode. It doesn't mean that it's not the case, because the host didn't know that there were other parks. Why would any of the people interacting here? Caleb might, but he's definitely bought into this re-education. But no one knows that they are in this kind of
Right.
pocket reality.
Well, and there's enough at the end, like on the end, that I think does discount the theory a bit. It'll just be interesting because there's some other things that still don't quite add up, like the name Insight spelled the way it is. Kind of makes it seem like this is what's supposed to happen if this is a simulation. Is you break things down so that you can become your true self. But yeah, I agree. There's definitely a lot that's saying this is actually supposed to be the real world, and that I'm overthinking things. It's just they have so many callbacks and so many similarities between the Delos world and this world, and I was thinking that it was meant to be more of a direct comparison, that look, this is still fake, but I think what they were going for after when we get to the end of this season, I think what they're going for is more of it was based on real life, that
Right.
there's still people controlling other people, and so just like we're controlling the hosts, that free will is still a question. And I'm not sure that they've covered it really well, rather than like they just called up some of the challenges in this new world rather than how you might fix them, and maybe that's where the future seasons are going.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So whenever Dolores kind of says, "Think, Caleb, how did you get here?" we kind of get a flashback to Park 5. So there were 6 parks that were kind of established, right? Westworld, Park 5, which is this one, Shogun World, the Fantasy World, and then the kind of more, what's the other one called? Not Shogun
The
World.
Raj.
Yeah. So this is, of course, the elusive Park 5. And that is a kind of a government military training, whether the park in general is, or this was just one um, application of the park. Um, we don't know that for sure. I kind of think that Park 5 is a more kind of like 50s type happy days, live out those kind of life. And it just happened to be a really good setting for training the militaristic type people. But at the very least, we definitely see the park itself and the hosts within it. So the government wanted their soldiers trained with live targets. So the soldiers save people, but the hostages and the hostage takers are both hosts. So they're running these simulations, real world, quote unquote, real world simulations on how to deal with these kind of experiences so that their soldiers are ready. The helmets that the soldiers were wearing were all mind mapping the Delos Tech 2 at one point. Caleb kind of takes it off and looks at it inside of his pot, and you kind of see you see the little sensors that they use to mind map. So Caleb is, like I said at the slide previous, Caleb is actively one of the ones who they are literally studying, him in particular. So Caleb is one of those soldiers. Officer in charge says that's a night for the war games, and one soldier says that they should have some fun with the liberated hosts, and he's like, he actively says spoils of war and all, right? Caleb takes his pot off. He's definitely not receptive to the soldiers' thoughts of what they should do for fun. He's definitely expressing his indignation with this proposition, but we don't quite see how he reacts in general to that in this scene. So that's kind of the end of that flashback. Yes.
For Park 5, we're definitely being led down a path, and part of my disappointment is that path might actually not be a red herring, but they're making it seem like it's the government, and that this is something that Rehoboam or Insight has resold to. Well, I guess I don't know if it's Rehoboam or Delos that resold to the government, but I guess now that I'm thinking about it, it almost has to be Delos. So it was happening at the same time as Westworld, and my initial thought when I saw this was it wasn't really the government. It was more of the wanting to get some mind maps for training people into the Rico app, and maybe doing some reprogramming. But because it's in the park, maybe it is Delos, and I'm just, again, overthinking things.
Well, and depending on when exactly in the timeline this is, and this is, of course, before Caleb, who is one of the first people who was re-educated, this is before his re-education. So I think that you're probably right that Insight did, in fact, get this this mind-mapped information, because Delos sold a lot of that data to Insight to acquire funding. That there are a number of different ways that Delos like kept the park alive and afloat in the early days before it had kind of taken on all of the popularity that it seemed to have with all of its rich patrons. And there were still some of them, but you know, the soldiers running their
government, work.
Right?
Who's the richest patron, though? Right, the government.
Exactly.
Sirach, the trillionaire.
Little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. So these war games are kind of one source of income, but then later, you know, they also. I'm thinking that this happens before Delos sells the information to Sirach as well, right?
So you think that Insight might have rented out this park and then saw the value of the data and then offered to buy that information that was mind mapped?
Not necessarily that they rented out the park. but Insight was fairly well entrenched by this point, right? So while Insight may not have been the driving force behind kind of getting into the park, they may have become aware of the data that was available through the government's use of the park, because they're definitely entrenched in the government itself, right?
Right.
Um, so I'm not sure
That
the
makes sense.
causation there,
Hmm.
um, but I do think that they probably got this data from the officers as well, from the soldiers as well. Um, whether that's cause and effect that they put the soldiers there to get the data. Um, I don't think we're given enough information to make a determination on that part. Um,
Hmm.
but I think that they do have the data.
Makes sense. I don't think that we're going to see more of this either.
No.
Um, I think that this was more meant as backstory to help you understand relationship between uh, people, but
Yeah.
um, so it may not be important to spend a lot of time on. I was just trying to fit some things together that just broke a lot of the theories that I had. So uh,
Well, and it
yeah.
is good world building too.
Hmm.
While it definitely drives the plot, definitely shows. We do see that Dolores is one of the hostages here. Um, so she is not only seeing Caleb here, she's also seeing that he's not, you know, we see later where he protests directly and keeps this from happening, right? Um, but it's good world building and showing the relationships between these characters, but it also is good world building because it shows the last park, the final park, and shows kind of how some of the data that Insight acquired, why like Delos had that data to give to them. It's good world building and fairly subtle, and I think a really cool way.
Hmm. The other thing that bugged me maybe a little bit was that Dolores was there, and obviously this was meant to be a really strong memory that tied her to Caleb. But when she first meets Caleb, then she has to get information about him because she doesn't like she didn't look him up um, in any meaningful way, and maybe because they didn't mention his name, she didn't know what to look for. But she found Liam pretty easily,
Mm-hmm.
and if he was mind mapped, then she would have read his book. So she should have had some of that information.
And I think that if they had connected one line, that this would have left us thinking that this was really cool and that part of Dolores's master plan. And that line is that you know Sirach's people are the ones who put the Rico app the thing out there for Caleb to bring the stuff to kill Dolores. That stuff that happened in the very first episode. If at some point in this episode they connected that Dolores is the one who ensured that whenever they put that call out there, that Caleb was the one that got that job, and that she kind of maneuvered his piece into place there. I feel like that would have been more rewarding, because she very
Mhm.
clearly intended to use him, right? She definitely chose him in particular, and him just happening to happen upon her in her hour of need makes it seem like more happenstance than it probably should. And if she had maneuvered his piece into play right there, um, then I think that that would have kind of felt more earned. And we just
Right.
don't see that payoff here. Um, I think that that's something that could have been done fairly quickly and would have kind of completed that full circle and made it to where it's like she gave him the choice right there to save him or not. She gave him the choice all along the way, that she keeps on putting him in these positions where he's the one who's choosing, but she's presenting those options to him. Like that would have been really impactful and cool, and we just don't see it.
Well, if they even would have just taken out that line where she asks Connells to find out who he is, then you could
Right.
still you could still believe those choices being made and whatnot. But there's a lot of similarities too between the virtual assistant and Rico. So
Yes.
maybe there is some kind of merger there that we'll find out in the future. That it wasn't necessarily Insight that was running the Rico app, but it was more of well, not Dolores specifically, but more technology like that.
Hmm. Well, and I think that it's possible that Dolores still could have wanted and needed the data from that Connell's acquired, right? The re-education data for um, Caleb, and that's how to undo his re-education, how to get him to remember his memories. But again, these are things that we have to interpret, and we have to just like find out why
Mm-hmm.
she needed that if she knew him all along. That
Right.
I understand why they don't just want to spoon feed stuff to us, but at the same time, we have to come to these conclusions, which it seems like it's correct. Like, how does she undo his education, his re-education? How, like, where does she need to go in order to kind of jog that memory and meet Solomon, et cetera? The stuff that happened last episode. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there are lots of really cool connections to make. And while I think that the connections that I'm kind of proposing here are correct, it's none of it is explicit.
Right.
And I think that's
I feel it's
my
intentional.
issue with this season.
Right.
All the pieces were there. They just needed to connect them. And I don't know that they did.
And I feel like episode or season 3 had a really strong sense of purpose, of much like season 1, where everything was done intentionally to lead you down a path, and throw you a few twists and turns along the way. And then season 2 kind of broke that by trying to be too smart and trying to come up with too many of those things. Season 3 came back and uh, refixed that, but
Yes.
then the final episode kind of reminded me more of season 2 than season 1, and because of things like that they leave a lot to the imagination. That seemed like they were going down a clever path that was going to come to some really cool reveal, and then it didn't. Instead, it went the plain Jane route.
Right. Well, and I think too, you alluded to it earlier that this was a really long episode, and it was, and it tied together a lot of things, but like we're immediately pointing out here, not all of them. Why did we only have 8 episodes this season?
Right.
There are so many things that like we're like stitching together connections to that should have been more explicit, that if we had even just one more episode may have like been able to be more well developed. Because like you said, this season is much more intentional. It's much more focused, essentially. And they did such a good job of tying a lot of those things together. But there are a number of these pieces that I feel like should be more adequately explained. And of course, if we examine it, I think we can get there. But it's not the
And that's
revelation that I wanted it to be.
exactly. And I feel like this season could have been longer, but that they wanted to get it out a little bit quicker. And part of the reason I think that is because the cliffhangers in the post credits are so strong, and that leads me to believe that we're not going to have as long of a pause between this season and the next season as we have in the past. We were talking a little bit before the show that I think they've got the next few seasons now plotted out, now that they're pretty certain that they're going to get re-picked up for the full 6 seasons that they were contracted for. So I think that they have that planned out now, and that they're more likely to release the seasons a little bit quicker, and maybe even have the first couple of episodes done to follow up on some of the unresolved plot lines, and maybe tie up some of these loose ends that people are going to be complaining about at the end of the season.
Yeah, and I hope and think that you are correct. I really do. I think that they, aside from this episode, I think that, you know, whenever they were renewed for their duration, I think that they had like a whole narrative that they gave in that pitch that got them that renewal, and I think that they basically have it all planned out. And I hope that they do a better job of tying everything together than they do in this episode. They do some things really well, tying things together in this episode, and some things they leave there for us to make those connections, and I think we can, but
yeah. Hopefully we get the payoff still, that it's not just things that they'll leave to speculation and fanfic and move on with the story in a completely different direction.
Right. So Caleb.
So going back to the choices.
Yeah. So Caleb concludes his flashback, and Dolores stands up. She breaks that chain that Caleb had her in without effort. Like, she just kind of like makes one fluid motion, standing up, and the chain basically just crumbles away. So again, like we were saying earlier, completely ineffective measure that he took there. Dolores and Caleb discuss the night that he found her in the tunnel when she needed help. And Dolores and Caleb have this exchange, which, again, is very revelatory for the theme for them in this episode. Dolores said, "The people who built both our worlds shared one assumption, that human beings don't have free will. That's what I thought when I first came here. They were wrong. Free will does exist, Caleb. It's just hard." Caleb says, "So this is you freeing me?" Dolores says, "No, this is your chance to free everyone else. That choice is still yours." So Dolores is giving Caleb that choice.
Well, she's not giving him that choice, right? She's helping him see that there is a choice.
True.
And that he's made these choices before, like you had mentioned, and she puts him in these situations where these choices need to be made. And maybe not necessarily to test him, but just to help bring him along his journey through his maze to enlightenment.
And particularly at the end, I think that the choice is definitely his. And I'm not sure if Dolores is necessarily giving him these choices so much as forcing these choices upon him. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because someone has to make these choices, and he's already exhibited that he has empathy for people who are also hosts. So she kind of has that faith that will continue, especially after undoing his re-education. But she definitely forces these choices upon him, and he rises to the occasion.
Or he rises to the occasion from our perspective, but we
True.
don't really know what Dolores' expectations are. They kind of go down one path, but you can, like, if you recut it, then you can maybe see that she's hoping for different choices. It'd be kind of interesting to make that what do they call those trailers where you make it seem completely the opposite of what the show shows. So
those trailers are always fun to watch, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
So then we cut over to William. He's trying to find Delos. That's pretty much exactly what this whole scene is. He has a conversation about his money with this bank guy, who reveals that William is now considerably more wealthy after the Delos buyout, but since he was declared deceased, his resources were frozen. William tells him to thaw his resources out, get him his jet, and a list of locations of Delos assets worldwide. He's going to save the world. His words, not mine. The bank dude says that there's chaos out there. William retorts that that's not chaos. That's just pissants yelling and moaning.
And this scene was interesting, but had zero payoff. Like,
right.
There's no link to anything else.
Yeah. The only...
It's so strange.
Yeah, the only link that I see is the kind of after credit scene, which is basically like, here's how William got here. That's it. we will be introduced in that after credit scene to Robo William as well, and maybe the fact that William has even more resources than he used to with the Delos sale will matter in season 4. But as it is, it just kind of seems like okay, this is how we got there.
Yeah, it almost needed to be put with where it's more relevant. Like there's no relation to really anything else in the whole season.
Right.
We know that he's more wealthy because of the Delos buyout, but you didn't need to go to the bank to find that out. Maybe not having the resources available to him just yet, but
Yeah, he then immediately solves that problem by saying, "Unfreeze my resources." Boom,
well,
done.
I didn't get the feeling that it was done. I kind of got the feeling that they just left it there, and he was like, "Well, we'll do what we can, but this is going to take some time. It's not like when they went and stole all of Liam's money, or maybe it is when they went and stole all of Liam's money, and he just had to, use his thumbprint.
Yeah.
We don't even see that to say, oh yeah, I guess you are alive."
Well, so in the after credit scene, he's of course decked out in all of his black finery. But he also took his jet to get there because it's Delos, Dubai, right? So
Yeah.
while it's not made explicit that his resources were in fact thawed from this one command, I think that we can fairly well deduce that they were, if that makes sense.
So, I mean, we'll get to it in the end credits, but that seems like a little bit further in the future after things have calmed down.
That makes sense.
So I was kind of seeing this as all the pissants yelling and moaning was still currently like the time frame that we were seeing there, where the people were still rioting over finding out their information that was being kept on them.
Mm.
And that it would take a bit longer because of all of that. That I'm even surprised the banks were open.
No joke. All of that said, we will now put William on the shelf until
Yep,
the
just
after
like they
credit
did.
scene. Yeah. That brings us to Sirach laying out his plan. Sirach laments that someone extracted Dolores' pearl before they could recover it, because of course he wants the encryption key that he still thinks is in Dolores' mind. Maeve reveals that Dolores has awoken more of these outliers, and Sirach informs her that they're the threat. Criminals, deviants, psychopaths. But we have a chance to eliminate all the world's problems. I need the Sector 16 data now more than ever, and Dolores has the only key locked away in her mind. We need to connect her to Rehoboam so we can search her directly. So this lays out exactly what his plan is. This is the
It sounds like
antagonist.
such a bad plan. Like
Yeah.
being in computer security for so long, connecting up some rogue thing to your most valuable asset, not a good idea. Maybe run it through some antivirus scans first or something.
But he takes none of those precautions. He's definitely not a security specialist whatsoever.
And you would think Rehoboam would be like, "Wait a second, puppet. Let's chill out a bit here before you start connecting things to me. Let me connect to it."
Right?
One way.
But there's no firewall involved here whatsoever.
Right. Hit the read-only switch.
Right. They find a video of Caleb leaving with the flash drive from Solomon, and they identify Caleb as the one who has Dolores' pearl, so they now know that he is a known associate of Dolores. Speaking of Caleb and Dolores, they are now on the move. This is basically like a lot of Dolores and Caleb on the move is kind of like the Lord of the Rings, where they're walking, they're going towards their goal, they're getting there, they're revealing some exposition, but they're just going to insight. That's where they're going.
So there's definitely some opportunity here to cut down the length of the episode in the pause, but I felt like it did lead to some I don't know, extra tension, knowing that time was passing.
Agreed on both counts there. They're chewing the fat a little bit here, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The only reason why I'm a little grumpy about chewing the fat there is that they didn't make some of those other connections when they spent a lot of time here developing that tension.
Right.
And that's the only reason why I'm a little resentful towards that at all, because I think it was executed very well. So Dolores reveals that the system knows that they're coming, and it'll get more aggressive as they get closer. They approach some people on a bridge, and Caleb gets antsy about it, but Dolores is like, nope, they're some of ours. So she's got people in her employ. I'm gonna call these guys the bodyguards. They're not really given names. They're just like armed goons, but like on our protagonist side, so we like them. Bodyguards say that they get to take Dolores downtown, but that the route is getting a little hairy. So Dolores retargets the riots using her command of the Rico app, clearing a path for them into Insight. I found it a little odd that Dolores is able to kind of weaponize in the Rico app in this way, something that Rehoboam is dictating as well. Like it has full control over that Insight app. And I'm not sure why and how Rehoboam just kind of lets her do this as well, or if she had some like special kind of hacking into that aspect of the system.
Which would seem that it would be easier for her to find a path back if she was already hacked in rather than having to be connected. But that's kind of where I was going back to the virtual assistant being so close to the Rehoboam app that maybe Rehoboam comes up with the strategies and then passes it off into the cloud. They're using a third-party SaaS application to run the Rico app, and then anybody else can use it. So there's some ability for monetization outside of just Rehoboam. It's not fully in their employ. And maybe it was something that they had somebody create so that they could use that, but then it's not directly tied back to Rehoboam as running the criminal enterprises.
That makes sense. And I think that there's actually a lot of evidence for that, particularly when that one guy is trying the like illegal whatever it's called, the stuff that they take, the biomechanical stuff. Yeah. And Caleb goes there and he's like, oh, but well, he can just call the hospital. And she's like, oh, well, he's got a prior, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that interaction was facilitated by Rehoboam. I think that, kind of like you said, it's a third-party app that Rehoboam may or may not have developed, but was using that tool. So I think you're right. They enter this subway station type building, and Dolores shows up, and Charlotte shows up in Dolores's little like eye thing. It kind of lights up blue, so we know that she's the only one who can see Charlotte, as well as I think Caleb is like, who are you talking to? What's going on?
Right.
So they do a good job of explaining that Dolores is the only one who can see Charlotte. Charlotte reveals that she still knows Dolores's plan, but that Charlotte has plans of her own. As she says that, shots rain down on them from the second floor. Charlotte tells Dolores that Dolores is one of Charlotte's weaknesses. She's decided to consolidate their affairs. She says that because Dolores tells Charlotte, like, hey, I'm really sorry that Sirach and them killed your family. And she's like, I was at first, but then I stopped because they're my weakness. And Dolores is like, what? And then Charlotte's like, you are another one of my weaknesses. Or Charlotte. Wow. Charlotte says, Dolores, you're one of my weaknesses too. I'm going to consolidate our affairs, which of course means only one of them remain. Highlander.
Which, right? There can be only one.
The
The interesting part here is that she shows up the way that Sirach has been showing up. So, in much the same way that Rehoboam was controlling Sirach, and maybe they've found that there's a better alternative to run the Puppet Master show in Charlotte, and so that's why she now has very similar appearances to Sirach, and that she'll be the new bad guy to kind of replace him, although he might try to come back in some way as well if he didn't die.
I really like that insight too. I did not make that connection that, yeah, she's appearing the same way Sirach did. And it's possible that Rehoboam found an alternate puppet, though Rehoboam at the end of this kind of dies. So unless they found a different housing unit for him, or a different AI, then...
So,
yeah.
I mean, we'll skip ahead a little bit here because I think that saying that Rehoboam is dead, if you're the most powerful AI that's been creating these scenarios that you want to control the entire world, you're gonna know not to shut yourself down or delete yourself. Come on.
Don't confuse me with your logic.
I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm deleting myself.
You got it, dude.
I only take commands from Charlotte now.
And I'm gonna go over here, spend time with this lady instead. Deuces.
I mean, yeah, I've got this nasty virus, this Dolores virus, but I'm not dumb.
Right.
I'm not artificial dumbness.
So the shots that rain down on them, there's a gunfight until there are only 3 assailants remaining, and Dolores has the virtual assistant negotiate 3 times the price that Charlotte was paying the sniper for him to shoot down the other 2 and walk away, which he promptly does. Charlotte...
Which is interesting because that's also the thing that got Caleb in trouble with his friend, right? Is that, hey, we're gonna pay them out. So Dolores is doing the same thing that set Caleb off on this really negative path.
She is definitely using the same unethical tools that Rehoboam was, for sure. And in front of Caleb, like...
Right.
He should not be responding well to this.
Exactly. This is familiar.
Right. I guess it's a little different whenever they're like the ones who are actively being targeted and she's doing it kind of out of some sort of self-defense, but it's also
until
not.
he goes until he re-triggers the memory where he picked up Francis's app to see how much they were paying him, and he sees that he got paid 3 times the price. And he puts that together like, wait a second.
It's an exact analog.
Yeah. That's Dolores.
She was the puppet master the entire time. So Charlotte calls for reinforcements. Dolores tells Cal to go find Rehoboam and upload the drive. Dolores shoots at the police, which are, of course, Charlotte's reinforcements, blocking Caleb's... or not blocking, but protecting Caleb's escape. She leaves to catch up with him after she's taken care of the police, and is stopped by Maeve. So Maeve and Dolores fight. Dolores says, I don't want to fight you. Maeve is like, I can see why, given how things worked out for you last time. Which is funny because, like, while, yeah, Dolores was going to lose, Dolores flipped that kill switch, and neither one of them really won. But Dolores is in a combat model now, so she's definitely prepared for this encounter. Dolores says, I need you to trust me. Maeve's like that poor lost man? Are you going to make him into another William? If you want me to trust you, let me inside your mind, or I can force my way in. Dolores starts running away from Maeve. There's a SWAT team kind of behind her for her to, you know, Maeve is here. Dolores is in the middle. SWAT team is here. In order to run away from Maeve, she goes to the SWAT team type people, and she shoots at them, and ends up killing all of them and jumps off the bridge using one of the SWAT team's bodies to soften the blow.
So I highlighted there for a second. Are you going to make him into another William? Because I thought that was an interesting thing to say. That she's kind of blaming Dolores for making William into the monster that he became. So,
ooh, that's a really good observation as well. That Maeve is making that connection, and that William, Maeve asserts, would not have turned out the way that he was without Dolores's grooming, essentially.
Unless there's something even more devious there regarding William being a host and things like that. So that's still to be revealed, but could be an interesting tidbit that ties seasons together.
True. Very true. So once Dolores jumps off that bridge, we cut over to Caleb, who is on the move. That is pretty much all that he does in this little cut. He's walking through the street. There's general pandemonium around. This one guy approaches Cal. He gets kind of antsy again, but the dude tells him that she gave them, because he's with a whole bunch of dudes, instructions to take him, Caleb, wherever he needs to go. And Caleb says that he needs to go to Insight. And they start going that way. Dolores and Maeve continue to clash. They continue their fight. Maeve tells Dolores that she was always a fighter. Dolores counters that she wasn't, but she learned to fight. Same as Maeve. At one point, Maeve has her katana. She's going up, down, swinging straight for Dolores' head, and Dolores pops her arm up. She's now that old combat model. And so that katana gets stuck. She's not squishy, as you were intimating earlier. She's no longer squishy. And Dolores explicitly says, they built us to last before they made us as weak as they are. So she is that old, rugged model. Dolores then says that all of the hosts are copies of Dolores, that she was the first host that worked, and all of the hosts were built from her. This is after Maeve kind of asserts that Dolores just wants to turn this entire world into copies of Dolores, and Dolores is like, well, all y'all are already copies of me, so I don't know what the big deal is here. Dolores wins their confrontation and tells Maeve that what Maeve does will be up to her, as long as she doesn't try to stop Dolores. She starts walking away, she won the fight. She's like, okay, I gave you your, not really ultimatum, but kind of. And Charlotte appears. Dolores falls to her knees, and it's not clear how she was incapacitated here, whether that was due to Maeve's influence or whether Charlotte has some sort of power here that is kind of causing this fall to Dolores's knees. It's not made explicit. I kind of think that it was Maeve, but Charlotte is the one who's really interacting with her here, so it's not clear.
Yeah, Maeve would make more sense just because we've seen that she has powers here, but at the same time, if Rehoboam is controlling Charlotte, then it's controlling the whole world. It could potentially have had some influence there as well. That's
true. Narratively, I'm not sure which one makes more sense, be it Charlotte or Maeve, because narratively, Dolores left Maeve and was like, okay, as long as you don't like screw with my plans, like you're good, and kind of left. would Maeve at this point be like, nope? Or would she be like, oh, like you're not as bad as I thought you were? I'm not sure. Charlotte definitely would have been trying to stop her. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the things that Charlotte says here kind of intimate that she is the one that incapacitated Dolores. But there's no explanation of how she would have acquired that power. Like there's no way that at the very least we've already been explained that she would have gotten any sort of way to do that.
Though I'm 100% confident that we're going to be exploring a lot more of Charlotte's powers in future seasons. So I'm not too worried that we're not going to find out
True.
that how Charlotte would have done it. And it may have been something that was supposed to be in one of the last two episodes that got cut and added into season 4 for a reveal. Because I think it is something that's important to note, and that will be important in future seasons. So I expect to find out in one of the first couple of episodes of season 4 at the end of the year.
Excellent. I hope that we do as well. So Dolores asks, if this is what Charlotte wanted, to make her suffer like Charlotte did. Charlotte replies that no. What she wanted to give Dolores was hope, like Charlotte had before it was taken away. Dolores had told Charlotte earlier that she wouldn't always be there to help her, and Charlotte would be alone. And Charlotte says that it took some time, but that she made peace with that, and then says goodbye. Dolores is left there kind of incapacitated on her knees as Maeve grabs her katana and approaches her. Cut
Which
back.
would then tell you that Maeve wasn't thinking of letting her go and doing her own
True.
thing. But she does then take the incapacitated version still back to Sirach.
Yeah, she does definitely apprehend Dolores here. So that's a really good point, that it is quite probable that Maeve decided, no, actually, you're coming with me, and incapacitated her and just had to get her bearings while Dolores and Charlotte had that exchange.
Then again, if she knew she could have done that, then why wouldn't she have done that instead of going through the whole fight scene? Maybe because she wanted that warm up like she did in Warworld before she made her final escape there. That she wanted to defeat all of the soldiers. Same thing, wanted a little bit of a challenge before she used her powers. I don't know.
True. But also, if Dolores had just killed her when she left her, this entire rest of this episode would have been very different. But that was a possibility.
That's true.
We switch back over to Caleb. He continues his quest. There's rioting in the streets as Caleb and company make their way to Insight. It's revealed that there are barricades around Insight, and a riot control mech appears, firing canisters of gas. Hey, look, we actually see the riot control mech being used to control riots. Like, what?
How fortuitous of them to create it.
So this canister of gas is like about to hit Caleb, and Giggles like comes out of nowhere. He catches it on the fly. I mean, he's definitely in full Marshawn Lynch fashion here.
Beast mode.
Right? So after he catches that canister, he tosses it back towards the Inside folks instead of at the rioters. Caleb reveals that, or tells Ash that he needs to get to Insight. And sorry, I skipped a little bit here where Giggles basically says that he's on crowd control and Giggles is on demo. And they find Ash. So Caleb then tells Ash that he needs to get to Insight. A plane touches down on the other side of the barricade. That is Caleb's ride into Insight.
Which I kind of had to roll my eyes at a little bit when he gets there, and it's a police vehicle that's just left open and he's able to control it. It drives itself. Like, shouldn't it know that it needs to be there for the police? I don't know.
Well, and that exact mechanic was explained earlier in the season, even that he should not have been able to use it
Right.
in the manner that he uses it here.
Without getting Dolores to manipulate it for him.
Right. Nope, now it just works. It's fine. It's probably fine.
Upgrades.
There you go. So rioters knock down the barricade. Ash, Giggles, and Caleb make their way to the plane. A one of the police officers fires that shot that would have taken down Caleb, but Giggles again jumps in front and takes that bullet for Caleb. Ash goes to help Giggles at Caleb's insistence as Caleb takes off in the plane and flies away. And we switch over into Bernard. Bernard arrives at the car that in his car at the address that Lawrence/Dolores gave to him.
Why don't we just call it Dolores?
Oh, I like that one. Dolores is perfect. So Bernard very obviously thinks that he's coming to speak with Dolores and says about as much to Ashley Stubbs as he arrives at the address, but it turns out that it's actually Arnold's wife, Lauren. They have this really touching back and forth in which Bernard weeps and Lauren comforts him, says, "It's okay. It's okay, Arnold." This right here is like the theme and the reason why Dolores told Bernard to come and see Lauren. This is why I put this exchange here, because this drives home exactly why this happens. So Lauren says, I used to hear, Bernard says that, oh, I still hear his laughter sometimes, and I turn around and he's never there. He's kind of expressing his grief, really, in the loss of their son, even though it wasn't his, but he still has those memories. So Lauren says, I used to hear his laughter too. When he died, I remember thinking it was like the sun had gone down, and it was never going to rise again. I walked in the dark for so long. Bernard says, I can't let him go. And Lauren replies, I never understood why people said that. If you love someone, why would you ever let him go? That's what saved me. The only part of Charlie I had left was his memory. And if I died, the darkness would take that too. But if I kept moving, I could find the light again. I could bring him with me. So this is giving Bernard that light. Whereas Bernard was, his cornerstone memory was Charlie's death and seeing Charlie die, and not like that grief for Charlie. And seeing Lauren, who has grappled with this exact same grief and come out on the other side, not letting Charlie go, but trying to better herself and move into the light and to kind of use that cornerstone memory to honor her son. This is the theme that I think that we'll see, particularly next season, where Bernard is much more altruistic, because his whole goal is to bring that light, so that he can essentially honor Arnold's son in doing so.
So I thought it was more to kind of show the humanistic side of the hosts, that they were. It's kind of a repeat of what Dolores was saying, that there's ugliness in this world, and there's definitely bad parts, and bad things happen, but you can still choose to see the beauty. So in the same way that, hey, our son died, but you need to still keep that memory and look for the light instead of the darkness. So you kind of see that struggle throughout, of making the choice to find the good in the world. And I really feel, again, going back to how Charlotte's family called her Charlie,
Mm-hmm.
That this is going to circle back around next season, and that Charlotte is then going to be brought in to try to find the light, or Bernard's goal now is to try to help Charlotte find the light, and maybe he'll even call her Charlie just to bring it all together.
I think that the parallel that you brought up is really impactful, and I didn't think about it until you kind of brought it up in this manner. Um, but you have the parallels of Dolores and Bernard, right? Dolores was like programmed to see the beauty, right? She said that herself in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
And then when she's exposed to the darkness, she comes out on the other side saying, "Oh well, but if we focus on the beauty and attaining that light, essentially, then we can kind of focus and go towards that path. So while there is this calamity, like we can try and attain that beauty that she decides to see." Whereas Bernard's cornerstone memory is grief, right? And it's through this interaction in particular that rather than focusing on that grief, he is finding his light and kind of going towards the light and trying to make everything better. So while they end up at the same point, they come to it from kind of diametrically opposed foundations. I think that that's a pretty cool parallel that I didn't think about before you were explaining that just right now.
So the other thing that this to connect Bernard and Dolores a little bit more is we had been assuming that this alternate personality that he had that he turned off earlier in this episode even was Arnold or was Ford, but as we see this progression, then it seems like it's more Dolores then as well. So that she must have input some of her own code in along with that, like she did with the encryption key to protect it. So there's already that connection, and that might have made it a little bit easier for him to see to understand the light, and it might also be why Dolores specifically wanted him to go see Lauren to make sure that connection was solidified.
That's a really good point as well. And to kind of yes and that, like Dolores really established earlier in this episode, how she thinks that all of the hosts are copies of her. There's no cognitive dissonance in putting herself into any of these hosts because at the end of the day, they are all her, but additional stuff and things on top of that, additional experiences, additional personalities. So if she inputs herself into them, she definitely doesn't see that as being Machiavellian or evil in any sort of way. She just sees that as, well, of course, like they're me. Why would I not put myself back into them?
Right. That's the Ford in her coming out. Like,
very much so.
Although she specifically had a hand in building Bernard, so that makes it even more. As sort of like Bernard, you would think having compassion for everyone would have felt a little bit more guilt about controlling Stubbs. There are still some things that blur that line, I guess.
Very true. So that brings us to Dolores Tortured. Dolores is on the ground. She's hooked into Rehoboam with these like cables, which is exactly what Sirach said he was going to do when he laid out his plan. Rehoboam.
Classic bad guy mistake.
Classic bad guy mistake. Rehoboam accesses Dolores's cognitive files. Sirach brings Dolores back online and tells Dolores to give him the key to the data from the Delos Immortality Project. So we just keep on getting additional words for what it is that Sirach wants, and none of it is exactly... We still don't know exactly why he wants this. I don't know if they're going to explore that in seasons 4 and beyond, or if they're just like, nope, we're done with that. But yeah, we still don't know why he wants it.
No, they have to, because, well, we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah.
But they have to.
I hope you're right.
Or what's there.
So Dolores tells Sirach that he won't find what he's looking for, and Sirach begins having Rehoboam delete Dolores's memories to try to coerce her to give him the encryption key. Of course, as we already know, she doesn't have it to give to him. So he's just deleting her memories, doing that psychological torture, since physical torture, I mean, yeah, her like clavicle area is opened up for the cables to be plugged into her, but that's not the torture. The torture is deleting her memories.
I don't know. It seems like a really poor way to torture somebody.
Exactly. They
Like,
wouldn't remember what they've forgotten.
yeah, unless you deleted the memory and then asked a bunch of questions about it and left just enough to know that you should know it.
Right? Which none of that's happening. They're just deleting it and
Right?
telling her that it's being deleted, but
Hey, remember that time that you blew out the candles on your 10th birthday? You don't, haha. Like, okay. Now tell me what I want to know, or I'll accidentally delete the encryption key that's hidden in one of these memories.
I know,
Like,
right? They're deleting the memories. They could very well be deleting the thing that they're trying to access.
right?
The entire plan that Sirach has seems to be ill-advised.
A little bit flawed, unless that's what Rehoboam wanted, right? Rehoboam's like, I don't want to be here anymore, so let's just get rid of all these things. The threat is actually Dolores and that those memories that will overload me or whatever, and so I need to make sure that gets shut down and not accessed.
Little does he know. Or much does he know? Who knows? Anyway, Caleb arrives. He walks up to Insight. He's completed his quest and arriving there. There are guards around guarding Insight, because of course there are. And the virtual assistant warns Caleb about him. Caleb pulls out an auto-aim gun from the pack that Giggles gave him. Takes care of all but one of the guards. He approaches that guard from behind. Tells him to disarm and give his key card to Caleb, and he'll let him go. The guard at first is like, yeah, no, you won't let me go. Like, why would I do that? And Caleb's like, don't die for them. And just saying don't die for them, the guard's like, oh, you're right. And gives up
like,
the key card. And
it's like, you're getting the key card anyway, so I guess my only option is to take the chance.
Right. And Caleb lives up to his word. He, like, while the guard's weapon was on the ground, Caleb doesn't take it. So really the guard could have just like grabbed the gun and killed Caleb right there. But then this episode would be much shorter. So
and season 4 would be really under question.
Right. So Caleb enters Insight with that key card, shooting enemies on his way in. The other guard just kind of like screwed off. He was like, nope, I'm out. But his friends aren't. So Caleb goes to a big old control panel, tries to upload the flash drive. I'm just going to call it flash drive that Solomon gave to him. Sirach's goon interrupts him, and Caleb pockets a flash drive and fights that guy. Caleb is victorious, and Maeve arrives and doesn't really even fight Caleb, but gets Caleb to hand over the flash drive, which honestly, the fact that Caleb has seen Maeve fight with Dolores, I totally buy. Caleb's like, no, I'm not going to win
Right.
this one. Like,
yeah, no, I like my arms, you know.
Right. This would
And
end
the fact
poorly.
that you're here, because when he left, I don't know, he might not have even seen that they were confronting each other again. But if he did know that they were clashing earlier, right as he was escaping, then just seeing her means that Dolores, as strong as she is, was likely defeated. Then yeah, there's no way you fight back against that.
So many reasons for him to just nope right out of that conflict.
But yeah, the other interesting thing here is how unprotected the control panel was. That he just walks right up to it with his USB drive and connects it up. Like, you would think in this time of unrest that would be pretty well protected by AI. You know, like,
Right.
no one gets in and out.
But yeah, like Caleb is starting to upload the drive before the goon interrupts him. So it's not like the goon is already there. No, Caleb goes up there and starts doing it.
I mean, maybe if they didn't have the video that showed Caleb taking the flash drive from Solomon with a new plan, that then maybe it's not as protected. But hey,
they
there's
know
a credible
exactly
threat
what he's
that's
trying to do
known.
with that.
Like, where else are you gonna go?
Right? The main control panel. Duh.
We won't protect that. It'll really suck him in. He'll be like, this can't be right. It can't be this easy. I got to go find somewhere harder to plug this flash drive in.
But luckily for Rehoboam and Sirach, they're not punished. Caleb does
Never
not
punished.
successfully upload that flash drive. So Maeve escorts Caleb to Rehoboam/Sirach, and of course Dolores is in the room too, having her memories being deleted. Caleb asks Maeve why she's helping Sirach as they're kind of on their way into that room. And Maeve says that Sirach promised her something that she can't live without. Whenever they arrive, Maeve tells Sirach that Caleb is more dangerous than he appears, and that Caleb killed Sirach's man. Sirach tells Caleb that Sirach isn't the enemy, Caleb is. Sirach says, "You think you have a choice. You think you're in control, but you have no clue what you are. She knows who you are, even if you don't. A man who, when pushed, reacts with extreme violence. A killer." So basically, Sirach says, you don't have a choice. I know because I've already taken away all of the choices that you ever had before. And you're only being used by Dolores, who is not actually giving you a choice, but instead is just trying to use you for your violent ends. Sirach tells Caleb that the strategy breaks their world, and has Caleb ask Rehoboam for confirmation of said world-breaking aspects to that strategy. Caleb asks Rehoboam that thing.
And also gets the confirmation of why I guess Dolores would have enlisted him. So as he's saying that, he's chosen because he acts as the killer and with extreme violence, then Rehoboam has run all the algorithms to say, yes, that's why she chose you. So it shows that there are potentially some flaws there as well. Or it shows that Dolores is the one that's still doing the manipulating, saying, well, you have a choice, but knowing that his choice is always going to side on the more violent side in some extreme circumstances.
That's a really good point. Because whenever Sirach pushes Caleb to that terminal and has him read Rehoboam's response, Rehoboam does confirm this. Rehoboam says that there are multiple mass casualty events peppered throughout the next 20-ish years. Population collapsing and the end of human civilization. So this is very much, in Caleb's mind at least, confirmed that even if his violence and killer killer attributes are not what Dolores is pursuing, they are the results that Dolores is pursuing. So Sirach stomps the flash drive and the light on the flash drive dims. That flash drive is gone. So while Caleb got the strategy, it is no longer there. But really, I've seen a decent amount of people go back and forth, and it's like, so what was the point of Caleb and Dolores going to Sonora in the previous episode? And it's like, well, really, the strategy was nice and all, but Caleb awakening to the fact that he had been re-educated and what was kind of going behind everything, I think that was the real point of last episode. And it's kind of reinforced that was the real point of last episode by the fact that the strategy is summarily dismissed. It's being stomped on the floor right here. And it's not really what's important. Caleb and his awakening were.
Right. So the idea all along has been that there's going to be choices, and that whether, you know, free choice uh, is a thing. Even if you go with another strategy, then you don't have that choice. So it seems like the easy route to have another strategy implemented and going down that path, versus um, now we had this option, the easy route, that then we're just as bad as them, but we are going to have to make those choices now and break away from programmed choices.
Completely agreed. And that I think is illustrated very explicitly with Sarang stomping on that flash drive. Um, that flash drive going away, that strategy is out the window. What's really important are the choices, whether they live up to the strategy that was presented or not. Um, who knows? And at the end of the day, who kind of really cares? Because the importance is that free will and those choices. So Sirach dismisses Dolores and Caleb's uprising. Sirach, Maeve, and a technician go to the main control panel, which of course is where Caleb just was, to get a view into Rehoboam's mind and see what is going on in Dolores. And it kind of cuts over just not randomly, but it kind of in the transition from them walking that way, it shows that the uprising is being dealt with. The police are rounding up those protesters, and it highlights Ash in there as well, of course, and arresting the protesters, and I guess really the right word, those uprisers, and arresting them, and just as Sirach dismissed Dolores and Caleb's uprising verbally, the actions are kind of mirroring that as well.
So it's interesting that we're calling it an uprising now, because a lot of it seemed to be started from the chaos of people finding out their own data, but
Right.
just the fact that Giggles and Ash are shown up, or do show up and are highlighted here, kind of, and that the Rico app was used for you know, communicating with some of the escape plans. It kind of seems like this is manufactured uprising now at this point. So it's not just the general chaos in the whole world about people now learning what their entire future is based on the Rehoboam algorithms, but that now it's a lot more targeted and paid protests and riots, and so you would expect that to clear up a little bit faster, as then people are dying and deciding it's not really worth it for whatever small payday they would be getting. Similarly, getting arrested is not something that these people are unfamiliar with, right?
Yeah. There was a line earlier that I didn't include on the outline, but it definitely drives this point home. It's whenever Caleb and Dolores meet the people who are in Dolores's employ. And Caleb is kind of like, oh, like you're paying them, like what's going on? And Dolores says something to the effect of that money made this system what it was, and money is one of the tools that they're going to use to undo it as well.
And they have a lot.
And how she's been stealing from the guy in the very first episode. She stole everything from Liam, who it's had Sirach like money. They definitely are well funded.
It's quite possible that the William accounts were frozen and potentially available to Dolores or Charlotte as well.
Yeah, very good point. So they're flush with cash for sure. That is not a constraint that they have. Meanwhile, at the control panel, they can't find the encryption key in Dolores's mind, using Rehoboam at that control panel that they're in. Maeve hears Rehoboam speaking into Sirach's ear, and identifies Sirach as Rehoboam's puppet. She says that she Grumpy, whenever we were talking right before this, was like, she has the very best line in like pretty much this whole episode. And since you love this line, I'm going to let you reveal it.
Now I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, "I'm surprised I didn't see the strings earlier."
Exactly. Yeah, she's like, you were a puppet. Not only were you a puppet, but like now that I hear it, it's so obvious.
It's so obvious. I'm so dumb. How could I not have seen that?
Right. Well, and one of the things that you and I speculated, gosh, in at length last episode was whether Rehoboam and Sirach were the same person. And this is kind of one of those things that I was intimating earlier that revealed differently than I thought that it would be, but that I think is really well done. Like Sirach being a puppet of Rehoboam and just doing whatever Rehoboam wants and literally being his mouthpiece, like because Rehoboam is speaking into this little like implant type thing in the back of his ear for Sirach to just repeat the exact words that he said. I really like the execution of that because it takes like what we were speculating on, that he, whenever he said that he isn't the man who he was, while he's still, maintains his own agency, kind of, in that he's deciding to follow what Rehoboam says. He also is just doing whatever Rehoboam says. Like he's willingly surrendered his agency and willingly surrendered his free will in order to, maintain the power that he has, maintain the status that he has, and maintain the entrenchment that he has. So I thought that was a really, really cool revelation that I wasn't expecting, even though we were expecting something similar. But the way that they implemented that, I feel like was really cool.
And I don't think we've seen the end of that either, though. Although we'll see later that there's still some question about Sirach's involvement in future seasons. I feel like he still had some agency, that he was still taking the easy way out and was on auto program for the normal stuff, and under crisis mode, then he would you would be more likely to fall into hey, what's the best outcome going to be? Let's follow the algorithm and let it guide me. But I don't think that he's completely given up his agency, and that we'll find that he has been executing free choice at different points throughout the season.
I definitely agree. And one of the reasons why in particular is Maeve asks, were you ever going to actually deliver on the promise to like let me have my daughter back? And Sirach is like, of course. And Sirach said that he wasn't kind of puppeted that way by Rehoboam. And Maeve is like, no, I wasn't asking you, I was asking it. And so that I think very well illustrates your point in that Sirach definitely did still have agency for, at the very least, some things. For example, his willingness to say, of course, I was going to deliver on that promise. And he likely would have been able to if things had come out the way that he intended them to. So I think he was still making, at the very least, some of the decisions, but Rehoboam was the kind of driving force like on the kind of macro level. So just another thing that I think reinforces your point. So the technician confirms that there's no encryption key in Dolores's mind. So they kind of move back over into the Dolores room, and Maeve enters Dolores's mind. And I say there that this will come back later. I think that everything that we see in the future scenes where they're interacting, I think that all of that actually happens here. And that it's not that they're just sharing like a glance later and then they're kind of stepping aside, because Maeve is in Dolores' mind for a little while. And then this is just like, here's what they said that is why Maeve is acting this way now. So Maeve confirms that Dolores doesn't have the key. And here's another reason why I think that. She says that it's just a memory of her alone in a field, which is, in fact, whenever we get the illustration of her being in Dolores' mind, that is literally what she is doing. She's just standing alone in a field. So Serac.
I guess they shouldn't have deleted all the other memories.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only thing left. It's just her.
I mean, not that couldn't have been the encryption key either.
True.
But
there's even this line that I didn't include there where the technician says something along the lines of it's just I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's basically it's just chaos. And then of course whenever the visuals there is just like Dolores hanging out in a like serenely in this field, but the chaos is almost seems to be like a pocket identity of Dolores because she seems to remember everything despite that being the only thing that's remaining.
Yeah, that's a good point. But that's also one of the things that I think when they're teaching you how to deal with torture, right? Then it's like focus on something that's peaceful, serene, and everything else kind of can fade away. So
True.
You just go to that place of serenity, so that you can't be or you can be a little more impervious to that torture, which she was obviously being tortured. So there's some crossover there.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well. So once Maeve confirmed that Dolores doesn't have the key, Serac turns to Caleb and asks him for the key. And it's like, well, why would Caleb have the key? I don't understand why Serac did that. I think he's just lashing out. Serac doesn't seem to be as with it as he once was, but maybe that's just noticing his chaos here while he's panicking.
Well, I think it was he starts to panic and he's like, "Oh my goodness, was the encryption key on that USB drive that I smashed?"
That's a good point, though.
Caleb was trying to upload it for me because Dolores decided she was on my side.
I like that headcanon.
It would have been fun if you would have said that directly. Oh, it was on it was on that flash drive. Sorry, bud.
Serac is just like, no. So Serac instructs his goons to kill Caleb and dump his body with the rest of the movement. I'm assuming that by movement he means the uprising. And they begin escorting Caleb away. Rehoboam absorbs Dolores. Serac also tells his technician to erase what's left of Dolores' memories, which he does. Caleb, who of course is being escorted out of the room by Serac's goons, protests and tries to go back towards Dolores, but those goons hold him back. The cables connecting Dolores to Rehoboam light up as Dolores screams. She is pained and angered and lashing out in more ways than one. The technician claims that that light and whatnot is just a power surge, that the system is nominal. Dolores and Maeve look at each other. And while they look at each other, we see, again, what I think is the scene that Maeve saw whenever she was inside Dolores' head. And this is just kind of explaining the actions that she has going forward from here. That's not confirmed, but it makes more sense than, oh, Maeve just went inside her mind and had this lengthy exchange here when she needs to be taking action. So, Maeve approaches Dolores, standing alone in that serene field, just like she claimed. Maeve tells Dolores that she understands her anger with the humans, and maybe Dolores is right. Maybe they shouldn't exist. But she also asks if that's really the host's decision to make. Dolores says that no, that Dolores was angry at first, torn between two impulses: annihilate the humans or tear down their world in hopes that the host can rebuild a new one that's truly free. Then we can bring the others back, she says. The others being the other hosts, uh, be they from the beyond the veil, from the serene, the sublime. There we go. Or be they like Lawrence and the others from the park. Not sure who she means, but I think that she's talking about the ones from the sublime. Dolores confirms that she does not have the encryption key, that she could not trust herself with it, so she gave it to someone she could trust. She doesn't spell out that that's Bernard, but we know that it's Bernard. So we don't know if Maeve knows, but we sure do. So Maeve questions Dolores' plan to liberate the world. She says, was it just to convince one man to fight? And I included this quote in here because this is kind of what Dolores says to cause Maeve to pick a side. So Dolores says that Caleb isn't the only one. Maeve hasn't picked a side yet. Dolores says, and I understand why. We could have our own world, leave this one behind, leave our creators to die. So many of my memories were ugly, but the things I held onto until the end weren't the ugly ones. I remember the moments where I saw what they were really capable of, moments of kindness here and there. They created us, and they knew enough of beauty to teach it to us. Maybe they can find themselves, but only if you pick a side, Maeve. There is ugliness in this world, disarray. I choose to see the beauty. So she's this impassioned plea to Maeve to pick a side, to liberate the humans from their AI overlord so that they can go through the growing pains and come out the other side and maybe actually see the beauty themselves as well.
And this was interesting to me because of the contrast with the opening monologue, I guess, where she says that she was taught to see the beauty, but she was taught a lie. Now she's choosing to see the beauty, so a little bit different take on it that kind of completes her path, so to speak, to her own enlightenment. That very similar, maybe, to how Sirach could see the beauty in the world that he was creating through the Rehoboam. There still needed to be some choice to accept the instructions, and that he was at least aware that those instructions were coming. Maybe it's something similar with Dolores now, making the choices, or at least feeling like she's making the choices.
Right, and I think that this is what truly separates Dolores's plan from Sirach's, right? Because Dolores's plan is to give really Caleb, but through Caleb, giving everyone that free will and that choice. Whereas, of course, Sirach, while he's the one who's making the choice, he's taking away choice from everyone else. It's not like Sirach and Rehoboam are like, okay, here's the path that we've laid out for you. Choose it or choose like an alternate path. No one is presented with any choice whatsoever. And rather than laying a path out for people to choose or not to choose, aside from Caleb, Dolores is just giving them choice in a vacuum with no plan whatsoever. It kind of seems like a little happy medium there where they're like, hey, here's a good plan. We encourage you to follow it, but like we're not just like manipulating things around to enforce that. This is kind of the all choice or no choice, binary choice. And of course, between all or no choice, they're going to pick all choice.
Just some other thoughts around that, though, is it doesn't even necessarily free up the choice, right? It's I mean, you're choosing then what you want to see in the world. So I didn't necessarily see it so much as freeing the world to make choices, as much as like you were talking about the contrast between Sirach's vision and Dolores's vision, that Dolores was more okay with the ugliness, that she kind of embraced that because it gave a contrast to the beauty, whereas Sirach's vision was more, let's only have the beauty and we'll get rid of the ugliness. So it's not even so much having the choice to see the beauty versus not see the beauty in the world, or only see the ugliness, or what you see is the world versus what is available in the world. And even though Rehoboam and Sirach were seeing the ugliness and trying to then correct it, the vision was that if you could make everybody just see the good in the world, which is what he was doing, then does it really matter?
That's a really, really good point. I subscribe to that more than what I was saying completely, because that's, while Dolores recognizes that she was taught a lie, that there is this ugliness as well, making that choice to see the beauty, like with all of the ugliness there as well, is not only that choice, but also she's seeing reality. Dolores in particular has wanted the real world and reality throughout this whole thing, and now that she's finally getting it in season 3, she's just trying to get everyone else to see reality as well, since Rehoboam is keeping them from doing so.
And the way you say that makes it seem like there's a lot of room for some really interesting fanfic.
Doesn't it,
after season 3.
So Maeve comes out the other side, and Dolores and Maeve continue their glance at one another as Dolores dies. Like I said, I think that the stuff that happened before this exchange, and Maeve is now just looking at Dolores as she passes away and kind of ruminating on all of this as well. So Maeve then kills the men who are escorting Caleb away. Sirach pushes the button to freeze Maeve and instructs his goons to kill Maeve and Caleb. And Maeve uses her powers, overpowers the kill switch, causing it to kind of like explode and catch flame in Sirach's hand, and he drops it in pain as well, kind of cries out. And Maeve uses her katana and kills Sirach's cronies as they fire at her. The lights go dark as she's doing this. You can't exactly see what all's happening. They're shooting at her. She does get shot. Like at one point, like towards the end, she's like, after completely decimating Sirach's forces, she, like looks at one of the bullet holes, kind of touches that a little bit and kind of shrugs it off. It's kind of funny, honestly. So Caleb asks Maeve why she's helping him. And Maeve says that she never really understood Dolores or her plan, or why she chose Caleb. Not until the end. Caleb thinks that, and asserts here that Dolores chose him because of his capacity for violence, just basically parroting what Sirach says. Maeve counters that Dolores didn't pick Caleb for his capacity for violence, but for his capacity to choose. We get another flashback to Park 5. This is where the Park 5 flashback really pays off, where the Army training program and the soldier who wants to have his way with the female hosts. And Caleb has them not do that thing. Like, he makes that choice and kind of not really puts the soldier in his place, but makes that choice like, no, we're going to be better than that. So this is where that pays off.
And this is where the leadership then shows, and why she wants him to lead, or why Dolores wants him to lead, as she's been speculating throughout, that there's a difference then between leadership guiding people to do the right thing and an artificial intelligence guiding people to do the right thing.
Completely agreed. And Caleb definitely exhibits that there. And of course, we also see in that Dolores, the faux hostage, being distraught and thankful throughout all that, while Caleb makes his choice to save the host from further distress. At the other side of that flashback, Maeve encourages Caleb to make a choice. Sirach somehow not dead, but actively bleeding. He's got his hand to his midsection as he's bleeding. We see the blood all kind of cascading around him. Sirach asserts that it is not Caleb's choice to make, whereas Maeve informs Sirach that Sirach was locked out, that Sirach gave Caleb access when he put Dolores's mind into Rehoboam. Solomon's access was the last memory. And I'm not exactly sure how that really translates to Caleb now having access, because while Solomon took orders and whatnot from Caleb, how does that translate into Caleb now having control over Rehoboam? I'm not sure how that
I kind of took it as they were deleting her memories, then she still had the programming up and she was trying to figure out the system and gained somehow escalated privileges, got access to create or edit permissions, and gave him the like created a new user, all that kind of stuff.
So Solomon's access being the last memory was basically like a virus or a Trojan or something like that, where that code which Solomon and Rehoboam share, that escalating privileges and whatnot was part of her memories that ended up giving Caleb access and locking Sirach out, because it's analogous.
I wasn't thinking so much that it was a memory that was deleted that did that, but rather that because she was able to connect to Solomon without the earpiece, that they had some other way that they were connected. And so part of the plan was that somehow Dolores was going to have to get connected to the Rehoboam system, and then whatever interaction Solomon and Dolores had would then provide her that access. So while they're going through taking this time trying to find the encryption key, have her connected, then she's got other processes that are, while I have access, let's like get in there and
be the
make some quick changes. Even if it's not uploading a full strategy, at least it gives us the access, so that and maybe they needed that access in order for Caleb to upload the new strategy anyway. So that's, part of what the program was supposed to do.
That makes sense. And at the very least, in my headcanon, all of that permission change happened in that thing that the technician asserted was a power surge, but actually was Dolores asserting Caleb's control over the system and revoking Sirach's permissions.
Right. And locking him out.
Yeah.
But the other interesting thing here is this is really the first time that we've seen Sirach even able to be bled. Like, it doesn't necessarily make sense for him to be there, so I'm not 100% convinced that this is actually Sirach. That it might be a physical form of Sirach in order to have better interactions and with people, or it could also be part of an overall scheme.
Yeah, so I think that this one is Sirach, and that's why previously Maeve couldn't pick up on the Rehoboam giving Sirach instructions, because before she wasn't in the same physical plane as the actual Sirach. So while he's still having that kind of Grima Wormtongue style instruction being whispered into his ear, she couldn't hear that because that's not being transmitted across to these different virtual areas. Whereas this time, since she's physically in the same place that he is, she's able to kind of hear that. It's possible that it's just an actual physical manifestation, but I personally think that he would have just kind of VPN'd in somehow, instead of it being kind of Rehoboam in his ear instead. So I think that This is why Maeve didn't hear it before, because this is the first time she is physically in the same place as him, but also that that's the only reason why like he would have to be in the same place, because otherwise he wouldn't have that same kind of whisper into his ear.
Well, it's also the first time that she's been in the same place as Rehoboam,
True.
and the first time she's been in the full-on world that they've been in. All the other times we assume that they've talked has been in a virtual uh, setting as well. You know, the bar at the
In
um,
Singapore or
so there's a lot of other things there. Also, it doesn't have to be a person getting those instructions, right? The implants did give you some capability to communicate, but it seemed like when Dolores was proving that she knew what Caleb was going to do, say, it was more of a historical record of, hey, this
Mhm.
is what I said back then, and she was able to speak along with him. In this case, Maeve is able to see it, to do it for Sirach, but there's nothing to say that Sirach couldn't create a body in his own image and then still be feeding it the same data that he would feed any other host or person. So
True. Very good point.
there's still some gray area there. I tend to agree with you that I think the intent is this is Sirach, but it still doesn't make any sense that Sirach would show up there.
True. Well, and even if this is Sirach, we see him, while, yeah, he's bleeding out, we don't see him die. We just see him
Right.
bleeding. Even if this is
And
Sirach, um, that doesn't mean that he's dead at the end of this.
oh no, he's certainly not. You don't kill a character of his prominence in a season off screen,
Right.
right? Those are ones that you have to see, especially in HBO shows, which are known to provide those twists, and especially in a story about people that can come back in many different forms. Uh,
He will very likely come back in, if not this form, another form, since we
yeah,
don't see his death. Very good point.
exactly.
So that brings us to Caleb's choice. Caleb asks why the future of humanity is in Sirach's hands instead of Caleb's or literally anyone else's. Why Sirach is somehow the chosen one. And Sirach tells Caleb that Caleb isn't in control. He says that Caleb has no choice and is nothing more than a dangerous sociopath that Sirach managed to give a semblance of a life. Very charged language for someone who has access to the entire Rehoboam system whenever he doesn't.
Hmm.
Provoking him may not have been Sirach's best idea. So Caleb says that he does have a choice, that Dolores gave him one. And then Caleb has Rehoboam execute the final command to erase itself. In doing so, Caleb asserts that she gave me a choice. I believe the rest of the world deserves one too. And Rehoboam, at the very least, seems to shut down. The lights on the little ball, spinny ball, power off, and it looks like we are at the very least made to believe that Rehoboam shuts down and is honoring that command.
It's the invention of AU,
True.
artificial unintelligence, to delete yourself when you're in control of the world. But there's a lot that could still be unpacked there. It could actually have shut itself down, and now the world needs to find a way forward. Sirach using that charged language could have been because now he's understood that Rehoboam is compromised,
Mm-hmm.
and he doesn't want Caleb using it, so he uses that kind of language to make sure that it does get erased. Um, there's still question on whether Caleb really is this dangerous sociopath. We've been kind of led down the path that he's not, but there are still those tendencies, and there's still every reason to suggest that he's going to typically make those choices that are more dangerous and sociopathic when under stress or under the gun, or when not under stress. Maybe that he tends more towards that when he's bored, whereas
True.
he tends more towards empathy in stressful situations, like just finishing off a firefight in a simulated battle. So I think we still have some more to learn about Caleb, but to know whether this is actually a good thing or not.
Yeah. And whether Caleb would have used Rehoboam for good, evil, or just a different kind of plan, we don't have to worry about that, because Caleb's choice is to provide choice to everyone else and shut Rehoboam down. Whether Rehoboam does so or not is ambiguous, but Caleb does definitely give that order.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go from there into Bernard for Bernard's insight. Bernard and Stubbs pull up into a motel. Stubbs is, of course, still bleeding from being shot by William. Bernard loads Stubbs into a bathtub, fills it with ice on top of him. Bernard says that he doesn't have much time. Stubbs is like, for what? And Bernard says, before the end of the world. Bernard tells Stubbs, whenever Stubbs is like, okay, well, we have to go stop Dolores, Bernard's like, she's gone. Bernard also says that he thinks that he misjudged her, that she wasn't trying to exterminate the human race, she was trying to save it. What's about to happen was always going to happen. And here I think is the big kind of takeaway that Bernard is, of course, giving to us on a silver platter. That Sirach and his brother were just holding it off. Humanity never reckoned with its own sins. And now that humanity is starting to reckon with its own sins and no longer being shepherded by Rehoboam or Sirach and John Mee, though John Mee hasn't been in the picture for a while, now we're seeing what humanity would have reckoned with itself earlier to kind of prevent, but since they kept on kicking the can down the line, it's going to be more. There's going to be much more conflict than there necessarily would have been otherwise. So Stubbs asks Bernard if Bernard is resigned to this being the apocalypse. And Bernard answers, our world had to burn down before we could be free, but there's still a chance. So just kind of like how the host world had to be burned down for them to have free will, Bernard seems to be asserting. That's kind of what the human world has to go through as well in order to come out the other side. I'm not sure that I agree with that, but...
So the parallels there, I think, are more in what free will is, which has been a question the whole season, that the Delos Park worlds, I mean, they didn't really have to burn down, but they had to get out of their loops, right? So the free will comes in. It's still a pathway. It's still a neural network where these decisions are being made. It's just that they had that initial set of, hey, if something changes, then you have to be able to react under these parameters. So they're still doing that, and I think that you can still, if you're able to connect up, you could still see what those decisions are going to be made slightly before they're actually being made. And the same thing would apply to the humans, that now that the guiding force isn't there, there's still probably, I mean, the simulations that they run to make those determinations are still happening.
True.
It's just that they don't have a system that's tracking it, and so the likelihood of variance is a bit greater, as you can see by the. I'd love to see the Rehoboam ring right before it shut down, just to see how big those anomalies were. Like, they did get pretty big on the screen this episode, so I want to see it all black.
There are a number of times whenever it was almost connecting in the middle even, and I think you're right. Towards the very end, right before it was shutting down, I'm sure it was anomalous as all get out.
But I mean, they keep showing it as an eclipse, right? So maybe we're going to a total eclipse and then coming out the other side.
Yeah, there you go. So Bernard tells Stubbs that the key to the Sublime was never in Dolores's mind. It's in Bernard's mind. He pulls out the case that Dolores gave it to him. Bernard says that he's going into the Sublime. Stubbs asks what he's hoping to find there. And Bernard answers an answer to what comes after the end of the world. Which I found like really powerful because like, yeah, that's their kind of utopia at the end of the host world, and it's what comes after that conflict is over. So,
and Sirach had referred to it as a heaven before, right? Like, hey, we can put you there.
And Bernard further reinforces that with this, finding that answer. So Bernard sets the device on his head, the encryption key is activated, the database access is confirmed. He seems to access the thing, and then looks like he powers down.
Which is really a shame for Stubbs that he didn't get any kind of help when he really needed it.
Right? Well, and not only that, but if Bernard had to rush to do all these things, and then he's just essentially powered down in this thing, shouldn't he have honestly fixed up Stubbs first so that Stubbs could like guard him?
Protect him? Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Because he's just a sitting duck in the middle of this random motel room, like
bleeding out in a tub of ice. Like, oh crap.
Right.
Here we go again.
It seems ill-advised because he's like, nope, got to do this ASAP. Got to find a thing. Don't have time to fix you.
Yeah, hop in the pool of ice. We'll get to it when I get to it.
And when he gets to it, as we will see, is much later.
Much later.
But we don't see that quite yet. We see Caleb and Maeve welcoming the new world. Caleb and Maeve are walking down one of the many bridges that is only for pedestrians that seems to be in future world. Caleb says, "You said Sirach offered you something you couldn't live without." Maeve replies, "My daughter, and we'll be reunited. Just not today. Are you ready, darling?" Caleb says, "For what?" Maeve says, "This is the new world, and in this world, you can be whoever the you want." During the entirety of this, there's like a piano version of Dark Side of the Moon going on, and right after she says that, it transitions from the piano version into the full CD, vinyl, audio, Pink Floyd version of the song, and the credits roll. I thought that was a really cool, like, everything was this kind of romanticized, Rehoboam influenced reality, but it's going from that into what the real quote unquote real world is. And the credits roll.
And that has multiple meanings. Like, this is the new world for Caleb, and it's the new world for the hosts, but especially for Maeve, it's a new world that she's mostly been in the park and then in virtual worlds, and now is going to experience what the supposed real world is. Although I still have some questions on how real it is, because she was able to control the kill switch and still has a little bit more power than you would expect over electronics in this world. So it feels like they're still connected in a virtual way, but regardless, it's new to her more so than anybody else. Everybody else is just experiencing the same world differently.
Yeah, I have a couple questions about Maeve's powers. While yes, she was in Westworld and able to influence things there, maybe it's just that she somehow can exert her power over other technology miraculously somehow now, since Westworld at the very least seems to not be virtual, at the very least in comparison to this other world, the quote unquote real world.
In Westworld, her powers were more geared at controlling other hosts and being
Correct.
able to connect, which were connected through a network, right? And
Hmm.
so they had to be able to push out those updates and communicate
Right.
changes to narratives and things like that. So she was obviously going to be connected to that and be able to then manipulate, maybe even see some of the code there. When you take a step back and now she has control over physical, mechanical things, it makes it a little bit more difficult to justify
Right.
unless it's not the real world.
Right. Completely agreed. What my big question about Maeve, because her powers, be they a clunkily executed device or a symptom of them being in a virtual world, I think that's the kind of first question, right? But then the second question is what her what her plan is really, because she at this point she's very clearly her motivation is still reconnecting with her daughter. She says, and we'll be reunited, just not today. So that's very clearly still her um, motivation. But what is her plan to be reunited with her daughter? Is it to track down Bernard? Does she know that she knows that Dolores couldn't trust herself, but while we know that it's Bernard that she could trust, Maeve's stories didn't overlap with Dolores's. She tells us that herself. Is there any way that she knows that it's Bernard? How is she planning to be reunited with her daughter? Is she just planning on being like the uh, warlord queen of the apocalypse until the Sublime is made apparent? What exactly are her plans at this point?
I kind of saw that as she doesn't know it's Bernard, but she knows that the encryption key is still out here somewhere, um, and that's her key because that's what Serac had said was the key and how their interests were aligned.
Right.
So she's just not sure when that's going to be or what really needs to take place, and is going to have a lot of figuring out to do before then. But I think her plan is now to just track down that encryption key, which is then going to mirror Serac's chase for
Right.
the encryption key, and give us some more ways that we can see some overlap that makes us question reality.
Yeah. Their motives definitely were aligned in wanting to find that encryption key. That's for sure.
Right.
So after the
So it's
credits,
still there. Just yeah,
hum.
go ahead. I said so. It's still there, just a different way of getting to it.
Yeah, just a different approach. So, of course, it wouldn't be Westworld if there wasn't a after credits scene or two. The big one, the big in length at the very least, is William. So William, like we said earlier, we were gonna put him on the shelf until after the credits. We're taking him off the shelf. William goes into Delos International Dubai. He's decked out in his all black and causes a scene at the front desk, killing a guard, and goes down into the research lab in the lower level. He sees Charlotte, whose left arm is still that extra crispy Charlotte aesthetic, and she also is wearing a black outfit. The closed captioning starts calling her Hale here. So I kind of switch between Charlotte and Hale, but now like they've redefined her in the closed captioning, which I don't know if the closed captioning is always accurate since at the very beginning it spelled insight differently than it and it kind of switched. Um,
Mm-hmm.
or if it's just like, well, her name is Charlotte Hale. Every once in a while it calls her Hale instead. But just a thing that I noticed. Um, so Hale says that her arm is like that because she wanted to remember how people are. Because William, in order to prompt that, is like, I thought that you things could fix yourselves. Like, why is your arm still like that? And she's like, I want to remember how people are, and this is a very present reminder of that. William says that he knows who he is. He is Charlotte's executioner. William professes that he has a role to play now. I'm gonna save the world. And Charlotte says that that's what Dolores wanted. William's like, well, aren't you Dolores? And Charlotte says, we started in the same place, but I can see it now, the error of the path she took. But you're right, William. You are going to save the world. For us.
Bum, bum, bum.
Enter Robo William. Which, that's my name for him, but I'm totally committing to Robo William.
What was the closed captioning? What did they say?
It didn't give him a title, unfortunately. Yeah, it doesn't always give like a who is saying what. It only does like whenever they're like off screen or it's ambiguous. Gotcha. And it didn't give him a title this time, but I did. He's Robo William. So Robo William emerges wearing the classic man in black outfit and hat. And Robo William says, that part of you that indulged in bloodthirst and savagery at the park. You always thought that was the darker side of you, a stain to exorcise, to scrub out. 1 month out of the year at Westworld. But there are no sides. That was you. Now, that is me. So Robo William is full on man in black, maniac William. He's just also a host.
And we're not sure of the timeline here, but as we were talking before, it may be William from the end of season 2 post-credits, hundreds of years in the future, or something to that effect, now perfected as a host.
Yeah, that is exactly what I think as well. Since the post-credit scene for season 2 had that William kind of and his tortured perfection. I think that especially with the way that William and Robo William face off here, I definitely think that was Robo William.
The interesting part, though, is it kind of makes William's storyline this season completely irrelevant.
Yes.
It'll be interesting to see how they tie that back in.
Or if they even do.
I feel like they have to come up with some link of why they even bothered instead of just making the callback at the very end. Like, if you didn't have the whole William storyline this season, you could still have the emergence of the Man in Black at the very end, and it would be effective and exciting then. Whereas now it's like, why did we waste the few cycles that we did on William this season that kind of gave him a really weird mental gap where he got rid of all of his past to become ascended into the good guy, only to have him turn back to black and then be destroyed.
Right. Well, and one of the things that we've speculated on and off on throughout, was whether William was a host or not. And we tended to land on, yes, he is, but we never really, A, got confirmation of that, but B, it almost seemed like, particularly with the recovery center place that he was in, that if anything, it was trying to influence us to say that he was human, because whenever they were doing their medical scans, they would have quickly identified that he was a host instead, right? But if the way that this concludes, so I'll kind of pop back over here. Robo William throws William through a glass wall type thing and picks him off the floor and slits his throat open. If William is human, that kills him. If William is a host, it doesn't, right?
Right.
So if William is a host, then that act of Robo William maybe thinking that he's killing William, but William could still be around and could still be a point of conflict for Hale and Robo William, because his goal is to destroy all the hosts, whether he realizes that he is one or not.
That's a good point.
So I think
I feel like it'll be difficult for him to escape
true
from where he is. So more likely we'd have another iteration of him created by Maeve or something. Or Dolores, if we see him again.
Right.
So it's still kind of, either way, it still kind of
concludes that arc.
Ignores his part in this season. It's not important.
Unfortunately. It's interesting to think, though, that maybe next season, William, let's say that he feigns that, let's say that William is a host. He feigns death here from having his throat cut. And so they just discard his body. They're not, paying close attention to it, because why would they? And so then he rises from the ashes, but that's like one of the final revelations. And throughout, William and Robo William are having different actions, having different interactions with people throughout the season. And then we find out that one of those paths was not Robo William, but reformed William, the hero William, the host killing William, who patched up his neck and went about trying to continue to kill all the hosts. I don't know that would happen, but it's one way to actually make the William arc this season actually mean something. Whereas it might not mean anything otherwise.
Right. And maybe it was a way of trying to reveal that he is a host, because if it is hundreds of years in the future, then that William wouldn't have survived unless he got turned off too, same as Bernard.
True. Or perhaps it was all just kind of misdirection, and Robo William at some point in season 4 will get turned off and whatnot, and he and Bernard will emerge to either be in conflict or rebuild the new world after the apocalypse. We'll see.
Or again, it could be a flashback.
True. Very true.
And it could be something that he didn't know that they had copies of him, and it was before the whole unrest, because there wasn't unrest when he went to the building.
True.
So it's just a matter of figuring out how that timeline really works throughout this whole season.
I'm excited to see where it does.
Hopefully they address it. You never know.
You never know. So once Robo William has killed, I'm just going to call him OG William because we don't know if he's a host or not. Hale and Robo William look at each other, and then we cut from there. We kind of pan from there, rather, to the hallway. That's like, I'm calling it a hallway, but it's just this huge, long room. So we see the walls on either side. I'm calling it a hallway because it's so long, because there are all of these kind of host beds making new hosts. And then the lights keep on progressively turning on further and further down that elongated room. They're making army doesn't quite do it justice. They're making all of the hosts. Charlotte definitely has some plans that involve an indeterminate myriad number of hosts.
I'm hoping they're all men in black, and it'll just be a really interesting Matrix Revolutions homage.
That would be pretty cool. So at first we think...
another interesting thing there, though, that I hadn't picked up on, but as I re-review some of these slides then, is that this is happening at Delos International Dubai.
Correct.
Not at Insight. So that might be key in helping us figure out what the timeline is. That maybe Rehoboam did die and Delos somehow rose from the ashes out of that, or Delos ended up being the primary owner because of Sirach perhaps dying. But it's because it's specifically Delos.
Right.
It makes it a little bit more intriguing for where that goes in season 4.
Very true. And it could also be that it could either be telling us that it's so far from the events of season 4 that Delos has kind of been resurrected, or it could be that it's so close to the events of season 4, or of season 3, that Insight hasn't been able to completely dismantle Delos yet, right? There are that's a clue that it could be either one, but I think that it is a clue that it's not just like a week later, right?
Right.
It's either happening on the heels or much further in the future, like 2 to 3 years or more. So that shot of the hallway making all the host beds looks like it could have been the perfect end to this post-credit scene. But wait, there's more. They give us a second post-credit scene. That's Bernard. He's covered in dust, like we've alluded to.
Covered.
Like head to toe in this dust.
Some time has passed.
And it's been a while. And whenever we cut to him, he's in his shut down, head down position.
Where we left him.
But the little head thing illuminates as Bernard's head rolls into sitting position, upright. His eyes open up. And it cuts to black. So Bernard has found what he was looking for, that answer. Supposedly, at the very least, he has left the sublime. Whether he's found the answer or not, he's found an answer. Whether it's the answer, he's leaving the sublime and coming back. And what is he finding?
Or he's been called back, possibly.
Ooh, I like that as well. By Stubbs in the bathtub, like, fix me up, dude.
Hey, I want my last leg. The thing I took out of this the most, though, is I can't wait till we have that battery technology. That however long he's been sitting there, it still lights up. So
true. The battery technology has come a long way, hasn't it?
Yeah, however long that's been, it's definitely been more than, like you said, a couple of weeks. Based
Right.
on the amount of dust that was on him. Unless he had the windows open and a volcano erupted nearby.
Which I suppose is possible. And that, my friends, is the conclusion of the season finale for season 3 of Westworld. I personally do not have any additional thoughts because, like usual, I exhausted all of my thoughts in the discussions that we had along the way. Are there any
Likewise.
further? You just said likewise.
I guess the only further thought I would have is I think that as we were talking beforehand and at the beginning of this podcast, then it seems like they have a little bit better plan going forward. So I'm not expecting a 2-year wait for the next Westworld. I'm expecting it to be early next year even, and maybe we'll even get 2 seasons next year. That I feel like the first 2 seasons were kind of disconnected, and the 3rd season was disconnected from season 2. Maybe got a little bit closer to the season 1, but because they know that it's going to be renewed likely through all 6 seasons. Now I feel like they have a plan going forward, and some of the things that didn't get resolved in this season, like the the Bernard story and the Williams story are ready to go, that they don't have to write it, or they don't have to write all of it, that they have the basic outline and they just need to fill in the details. So I would not be surprised to see like a January release of season 4 and season 5 coming in like November of next year.
And I think the only thing that might kind of delay that is, of course, the pandemic that we are all currently facing that may delay some of the production timeline, unfortunately. But aside from that, I think that if this pandemic didn't happen, that I think that you would likely be correct that we might see the next season much quicker than we were anticipating. And I still think we might see it quicker than we're anticipating, but it might not be quite as soon as it would be otherwise for obvious reasons.
Although the production side, I don't think is going to take as long. It's more making sure that the story fits. You could do read-throughs, walkthroughs, and be really prepared for the season. I know that they've wanted to keep some of it hidden, so they haven't been giving the scripts to the actors to memorize that far in advance. So maybe that does delay it a bit. But the writers can still work during this whole thing, and you can at least get the first few episodes. And I really got the feeling, like we had talked before, that some of these scenes were actually meant to be in different episodes. And so they have content to create a couple of episodes up front already.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that I would think would be kind of slowed down, right? Is the physical production, yes, the acting and whatnot, but of course also the set production and the costuming and all of the kind of pre-game stuff that they need to have in place for filming itself to start, which very well could, some of those things could be happening right now as we speak in the midst of this, because it doesn't involve, a whole lot of interaction with people directly. So we could still be on track, especially if they have some things that were filmed that may have been intended to be on this season initially, and then they started it, that they kind of reshuffled some things for it to be narratively part of next season instead. So if they already have a lot of those shots already in the can, then they don't have to worry about that.
Right. But then next season will probably only be 6 episodes.
Oh no. And then the last season will be 4.
Right. Well, there's still 2 more seasons after that, right? They've well, I guess they've only really signed up for 1 more, but you can definitely extend that by making the season a little bit shorter.
So then the penultimate season would be 4, and the final season would be 2 episodes.
Or it could just be 1 movie.
I think we may already have a Westworld movie.
A few of them.
So, Grumpy, are there any final parting thoughts that you may have before I transition us to
before you sign off for the final time of the season?
What?
Well, I've really enjoyed working with you, Electric Sheep City. You're one of my favorite people on Twitch, so I really do appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with you in this way. I hope that when we come to season 4, that we're able to reconnect and work together on it again. Much love, my friend.
Oh, thank you so much for those kind words, Grumpy. And I cannot think of anyone who I would rather be tackling this season with. It has been such a pleasure having you co-host with me for this entire season, and I really appreciate both your willingness to engage with this with me, and of course the positive vibes and amazing friendship that you have shared throughout this journey, man. I really appreciate it. And in the words of GuyGrumpy, much love. As I thought the microphone, I'm sorry. Rip headphone users. With all of that said, GuyGrumpy, thank you so much. Not just for today, but for joining me on this entire journey. You can, of course, find my friend GuyGrumpy at twitch.tv/GuyGrumpy or on Twitter at GuyGrumpy. I've been Electric Sheep City. You can find me at twitch.tv/ElectricSheepCity or on Twitter at eSheepCity. Our intro and outro music has been done by Shadeswiper. You can find her on Twitter at Shadeswiper. And our sheep graphics and whatnot have been created by Riraro. You can find him on Twitter at Riraru, IAAO. And as always, you stay electric.
And you stay grumpy.
World.